in the slider below, it shows that the darker colored countries are the ones which have a higher disease burden. And this is disease burden by by per capita. It's per 100,000 population. It's not disease burden as the country as a whole, because then obviously India and China will lead this league because we have the highest populations. But if you look at per 100,000 population, then this is the kind of disease burden. And I want you to look first at the 1990 map, where you see India in quite a dark color. Of course, there are still darker parts of the world, but India does have, even in 1990, when I joined the industry, for example, at that time, India had quite a significant disease burden of about 80,000 dailies, disability adjusted life years per 100,000 population, which is a massive amount. And if you took the absolute quantity of disease burden, then India was leading the world at that point of time. I remember, making those calculations, looking at the global burden of disease website, and looking for those figures. And I was astounded to see that India's disease burden in 1990 or thereabouts, maybe even up to 1995, 96, was about 1.5 times that of China, even though at that time China's population was significantly higher than India's. And then let's come to 2019, where you see that the color for India has diminished significantly. So we have made great improvements, and we've come quite close to China overall. And, indeed, the rest of the world also has improved quite a lot. And this has probably been because of the use of vaccines worldwide, where the pharmaceutical industry plays a very big role. And indeed, India and the Indian industry plays a massive role. So all the reduction in color that you see in 2019 in Africa, for example, is because of vaccines produced in India by companies like Serum Institute in Pune and some other vaccine manufacturers in the country. That the disease burden by 2019 came down very, very significantly for the whole world. And then we come to, and just a point to note here is that 50% of the doses for vaccines worldwide is produced in India and supplied from India. So that's a figure that you would like to keep in mind. More than 50%, in fact. And then we come to 2021, and here it's interesting to see that the color has darkened a little bit. But remember that 2021 was the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the reason for that darkening of color everywhere across the world is probably that. And that's the latest figures that we have. So I don't know what the figures would look like in 2025, but I predict that they will be moving closer to what it was in 2019. I'll move on to the next slide. Let's see, now that we've seen disease burden and seen which parts of the world have a higher disease burden, let's look at the daily defined doses used by individuals. So at an individual level, these are the daily defined doses that countries consume. So this is the consumption of medicines in different countries. And you see that India's total consumption, this is total consumption of the entire country. So you would expect that the consumption would be high in places like India and China. And as a result of their having that larger population, and the consumption would be somewhat lower in places where there is a smaller population. On the other hand, those populations which are richer and have greater access to medicine will also be consuming more medicines. So some of the effect of a lower population will be offset by the fact that those populations consume more medicines per capita. And as a result, you see that the consumption in countries such as the United States, and here you see it as North America, that is that is the fourth one. The I'm sorry, it's the second block from above, that is the orange one. That is North America, and that's not very far lower from India and China. India is the dark colored green one, and China is the third block from above. China is, for example, in 2025, and this is a forecast, of course, but the reality will be very close to that. China is at about 337 daily defined doses, while the United States or North America, including Canada and the US, is at 299. Not very different, even though their population is one-fourth of that of China. That's because the consumption per capita of medicines is much higher there. And also the affordability is much better. So with this little overview of how medicines are used, let's come to the next slide. Pharmaceutical markets. So if there is high consumption of medicine in a country and the affordability is also good, then you will see larger circles here. The abscissa here, that is the horizontal line below, shows the daily defined doses per capita. And you see that Africa, Middle East, Asia Pacific, India, including China, use less daily defined doses or less volume of medicines per capita than Western Europe or Japan on the right hand side, where the daily defined doses used per capita per year is 1,200 units. While for India, it is as low as kind of 250 to 300 units. Asia Pacific is slightly higher. China, even though they can afford a lot more than India can, China is much richer than India at this point of time. Even then, their consumption of medicines, which is Western medicine here, we are not talking of Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese traditional medicine, their consumption is pretty low still. In between, you have Eastern Europe, North America, Latin America. These are middle income countries, and you see the difference here. I'll go on to the next slide. So consequently, you see the top pharmaceutical markets in the world, which is a function of affordability, access to medicine, as well as the availability of medicines, the cost of medicines, the disease burden. All of that together gives you the size of the market as such. A market means how many dollars worth of medicines is sold in a particular country. And we are able to see here that, and astounding figures, the United States of America has 40% of the share of the global pharmaceutical market, 40%. And in some sources, from some sources, that figure is even higher. I have found some sources saying that the United States constitutes 51% of the market. Of course, there are different ways of calculating the market. Do you only calculate prescription drugs, or do you also take over-the-counter drugs? Do you consider vaccines also as drugs? Do you consider several other things, nutraceuticals and things like that? So there are different ways, but it gives you an overall general idea of where India stands in comparison to the rest of the world as a pharmaceutical market. And that's important because the bigger pharmaceutical companies and the country standing as from that point of view of whether people want to do research in India or not, whether they want to manufacture drugs in India or not, all depends on how big the market is. If the market is very small, then that reduces one of the components that leads companies to begin to think of doing research in a particular place. If suppose India's population, which is the highest in the world or thereabouts at present, would be a very good place to do research because you get lots of patients. But because the market is very small, that kind of reduces the importance of India as a place to do research, because people want to do research in those populations where their drugs are going to finally be sold. And if India is going to buy very little bit of those drugs, then it may not be that good a place to do research, even though the number of patients available here might be quite high. Of course, there are many other reasons why particular countries are chosen, but this is also one of them. So India stands at 10th position today, together with Brazil, Spain, Canada, Russia. All these countries have much smaller populations than India, much, much smaller populations. Despite that, their consumption of medicines, the dollar value of the consumption of their medicines is the same as that of India, or more or less the same. There are Brazil is another third world country which is above India in consumption, and indeed per capita consumption would be much higher because Brazil's population is much lower than India's. Russia is also another developing country. Mexico is in the list, and of course most of the others are developed countries here in the top markets because their affordability and access to medicines is much better in those countries. I'm going on to the next slide, which talks a little bit about the achievements of the Indian pharmaceutical sector in the generics market, and I'll come to explain about what generics market and what the innovative market is in pharmaceuticals. But suffice it to say now that here you can see India's contribution to the API manufacturing facilities. So India API stands for active pharmaceutical ingredient, that is the salt, the medicine that is there in each tablet or each injection. And as you know, as pharmacologists, you are aware that a particular tablet will have maybe 1 milligram or 2 milligrams of a drug, or maybe 200 or 300 milligrams, while the tablet actually is has a much greater weight. It is probably 2 grams, 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams. So the active ingredient is only a small proportion of a pharmaceutical dosage form. And there you see that the API manufacturing, the active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing facilities in India contribute quite a lot. So we are not very far away from the United States. China has fewer API manufacturing facilities than India has. And USA and Europe, of course, have more, but not that much more in comparison to when you take any other industry. For example, if you take the automobile industry, or if you take the chemicals industry, or you take any other kind of industry, India doesn't do as well as it does in the pharmaceutical sector. And I'm talking here only of API manufacturing. If you take formulation manufacturing, then that will be even a bigger number than this. But I couldn't get those figures anywhere, so I can't show them to you here. I'll go on to the next slide. International trade in pharmaceuticals. And here's a list of 15 countries, the top 15 countries that export pharmaceuticals. The figures are from 2021. Later figures were not available to me. They were available, but it would be difficult to transpose them into my slides. So I've used these figures. They are representative of what the condition even today is. So these are the top 15 countries that export medicines. And you see that Germany is a top exporter of medicines with $64 billion of medicines exported out of Germany, constituting 15.2% of the global export trade in pharmaceuticals, export-import trade in pharmaceuticals in the year 2021. And you see that India is 10th in number with $17.5 billion in sales in comparison to $64 billion of sales in Germany and many other countries ahead of us: United Kingdom, Netherlands, Ireland, Italy, France, United States, Belgium, Switzerland, and there are other countries below us: Denmark, Spain, Canada, Slovenia, and Sweden. So you might ask the question that I have been telling you that India is doing very well in pharmaceuticals and we manufacture a lot, etc., etc. But the figures, we are somewhere between 10th position. So if you get 10th position in your class, then that's okay. That's in a big class, that might still be a very good position. But in a smaller class, that might not be that great a position. But what is interesting in this slide is that if you look at these 15 countries, not one of them, other than India, is a developing country. You don't have Russia here. You don't have China here for once. You don't have any of the other big population countries, Indonesia or Brazil or anybody else. It's only India in the top 15 exporting countries that has managed to get a position here at least. I will go to the next slide. Now, to just give you a view of, and this is just a snapshot, this keeps changing from year to year, but nevertheless, you get an idea of the size of and the market share of big pharmaceutical companies across the world. You will notice that there is not a single Indian company. Now, let me just go back to my previous slide for a moment, and let me tell you the reason why India is 10th, while there are other countries ahead of us. The reason is because we play only in the generics market, which is a low value market. The medicines that we export cost much less because they are not patented medicines. They are not new medicines. They are generic medicines that are sold at low prices. And since these are dollar values, those are the low prices that you have. If we were to look at this from the point of view of volumes, then India would be much higher on this ladder. I'm not sure whether it would be the first. I don't think it would be the first, but it would be quite high up, maybe in the fourth or fifth position, third or fourth position. Now let's look at the manufacturers. The biggest manufacturers in the world are, and this also varies how you consider what you consider as pharmaceutical products. For example, Johnson and Johnson. This company is slated to have the first position on this chart, and that's probably because Johnson & Johnson also manufactures other healthcare products such as prostheses, knee replacement prostheses, and other kinds of prostheses, and other kinds of medical equipment other than drugs. So if you were to look at drug manufacturing companies, Roche, Pfizer, Bayer, Novartis, these are big manufacturers, GlaxoSmithKline, Merck, and these positions keep on changing from year to year. And the biggest changes come because of mergers and acquisitions. So it's difficult for a company such as Pfizer to go up from 6.2 to maybe even 6.5 or 6.6 in a short term, because all these companies are growing and the relative market share might remain the same. However, if Pfizer tomorrow merges with Bayer, they buy Bayer, or Bayer buys Pfizer, and it becomes one company, then obviously they will jump to the top of the list, because 5 and 6 makes 11, so there'll be more than 12% of market share right away. So this was just a snapshot. Now, enough of the commercials and volumes and numbers. Let's look at the product life cycle. Pharmaceutical products, drugs, medicines are almost invariably produced by the pharmaceutical industry. There's nobody else that gets medicines to market. Any medicine that you want to buy, modern medicine, you will have to go to a pharmacy shop, and the medicine will have been manufactured by a pharmaceutical company. So, and it's not only the manufacturing, but the development of the medicine is also the pharmaceutical companies or the pharmaceutical industry's domain. Now, I will parse that sentence a little bit more as I go along, because not all of it comes from one company. and there are other contributors as well, including academic researchers and government-supported programs and things like that. Very important contributions are made very early on in the identification of targets and so forth. But after that, it is the pharmaceutical industry that has to discover new drugs. And this is how it goes. And you see on the abscissa the sales of products, and on the on the ordinate you have the sales, and on the abscissa you have the time. So you see that there are no sales of drugs in the development period, obviously because the drug is not in the market as yet. So, and we can go even further to the left before a preclinical or phase one to take on the discovery phase as well. So there is a discovery and development phase of any new medicine that is sought to be brought to the market. And then the discovery phase, the preclinical development, and then there is the clinical development, which you see on this slide. Preclinical and phase one, and then phase two and phase three. You're quite familiar with these terms, I'm sure, as students of pharmacology. And then after phase three, the dossier, that is all the information that has been generated during the course of development of this new medicine, which shows that the medicine is effective, efficacious, and that it is safe to use in humans. It is only then that it is introduced into the market. It's only then that it can be introduced into the market after the regulator provides permission for that, has reviewed all the data and all that. So then the product gets introduced, but it's not that people will immediately start buying this product because they don't know about this product. The product has not reached their pharmacies as yet. Doctors don't know about it, or even if they know about it, they are not confident about whether it will work, whether it will be safe. So there's a trial period, and slowly, one by one, different countries begin to launch the product, and there is a growth phase of the product cycle of a medicine. And then it reaches a peak. And in pharmaceutical circles, it's called the maturity phase of the product life cycle. And then it starts to decline. The sales start declining. And what is the reason for that decline? The reason is that there are Me Too drugs. If you have, let's say, a cimetidine introduced into the market, you will then have a ranitidine and a famotidine and other tidines coming along, and they will compete with each other. You have, so you have one statin, you have another statin, and then you have 15 statins competing in the market. And obviously, so this maturity might even come earlier. And that is what we are seeing in recent years, that peak sales come much earlier, and then the decline begins very quickly because there's a lot of competition. And then finally, the patent on the drug runs out. So this is something very important for academicians to understand, that pharmaceutical products are patentable. The molecule itself can be patented. And patenting means that you have exclusivity in the market, so nobody else can claim to sell that medicine in the market till the patent runs out. And the patent period is 20 years. And one important thing about the patent is that you can patent a product only if it is, at that point of time when you're patenting it, unknown to the world, that nobody else knows what the structure of that molecule is, what it does, what it would be useful for. Nobody has that idea. So you patent your idea, and you patent the fact that you've developed something. And therefore, the patenting has to be done very early. If you do not do it early, then somebody will steal your product. Somebody will copy your product, and they will patent it. And then they get the exclusive right to market that product for a period of 20 years. So it is very important to patent it early, and it is patented immediately after discovery. The moment you have discovered a molecule, you patent it. And indeed, the molecule might never come to the market because you might realize that this medicine is not safe. even then it has been already patented. You have rights to that molecule for 20 years if you have patented it in time. And that is the reason why it is important, even for academicians who are doing research in their laboratories, to ensure that they patent their molecule before they publish anything. Because the moment you publish something, it becomes public knowledge, and then it's just impossible to sell it to anybody. Nobody will take it because they don't have exclusivity. So that's the product life cycle. So once you come to the end of the 20 years, so the faster, now some of the takeaways from this slide are that the faster you can come to finish the development phase and put the product into the market, the longer you have within the patent period to market your product, and so the greater is will be your returns. Because once the patent runs out, the 20-year period runs out, then there is generic competition. It's not only a famotidine or a ranitidine competing with a cimetidine. It becomes like the same cimetidine molecule can be introduced into the market by generic competition, which is what Indian companies are very good at doing. So, this is a very important slide, particularly for understanding that the rate at which you can do your clinical trials, the speed with which you can do it, the recruitment rate, every day counts. And for $1 billion drug, every day will be a few millions of dollars of lost sales, the slower you are in developing the product. I'm going on to the business models now. So there are many types of pharmaceutical companies. The world is dominated by the innovators. So all the big names that you hear, the Pfizer's, Glaxo's, Novartis's, BMS, and so on and so forth, Novo Nordisk or Johnson and Johnson, these are all innovator companies. So they have this huge setup where they discover new drugs, then they develop these new drugs, and they take it to market. Then you have the generic companies, where Indian companies have a very good standing, but there are other companies such as Israel's Teva or Mylan or some of these other companies in Europe and the US that copy the molecule. They develop a manufacturing process and they sell generic molecules after the patent has run out. That itself is a reasonable market, but it's a much smaller market, and the pricing for these products is much lower than the patented products, because the patented products have exclusivity. The competition is much less. Generic products, the competition is much more. Then you have the biotech companies. The word biotech came many years ago when biologicals were a novelty, and only small companies developed the process and then put it in. These days, some biotechs have become very big. But by and large, the word biotech is used for the smaller companies that are developing biologicals. They also have good exclusivity. The pricing is high. But their business model is a little different from innovators and generics. Innovators and generics are business to consumer directly. But biotech companies often develop a drug up to stage one, phase one, or phase two, and then sell it to a bigger company to market it. They will sell it to an innovator company or some other company to market it, those companies which have a big marketing setup. Then we have the API manufacturers. This is also a business to business thing. And the pricing again here is low. Then you have the diagnostics companies, the device companies, and the tech companies. They have substantial exclusivity, so their pricing can be good. Sometimes it is variable. And these days, we also have tech companies. Now, these are not pharmaceutical companies. These are all healthcare companies. Even the diagnostic device and tech companies are not pharmaceutical companies. But as pharmaceutical physicians or pharmacologists in the industry, often we will find ourselves in companies that are manufacturing diagnostics or manufacturing devices or even IT algorithms for artificial intelligence. And we have to be able to provide our services to them. Quickly, we will go through a few more slides. Drug development, it's a multidisciplinary endeavor. We talked about the discovery phase and then the clinical development before the product goes to market. So this is all before the product has gone to market. And you have the discovery phase where there can be laboratory research going on, or there can be preclinical research going on, animal studies, or you can have clinical trials. And this is multidisciplinary. So you see chemists, you see computational biologists, you see cell biologists and molecular biologists, biochemists, pharmacologists as well, and pharmaceutics people in the early phase of development in the laboratory. Then you have the animal research, where you have pharmacologists, toxicologists, pharmacokineticists. You might have regulatory science people, because after this phase, the product will go into clinical trials, and you require permission for clinical trials, and you have to approach the regulatory authorities. So regulatory science people also come in at that stage. And then you have the clinical trials phase, the clinical development. Uh, there are clinical pharmacologists here involved in the very early part of development in phase 1 studies. You have development pharmacovigilance people. You have the clinical sciences that write the protocols. You have regulatory affairs, research ethics, manufacturing scale up, market assessments, various types of people, and multidisciplinary. This slide is also a very important slide. It shows you the attrition in drug development. We start off with many molecules discovered, but then as we move on along the chain, the target, you get hits from the target, and then from hits, they develop leads, which are some better molecules that have been developed after manipulating the hits. Hits are those molecules which are interacting with the target. Target is the protein molecule which is there in the body, and that is part of the disease process that you want to modify. The hit is a potential new medicine, and you might have many hits in a development program. And then the hits have to be modified and improved so that they become they begin to have the properties that are required for a good pharmaceutical product, such as a longer half-life so that they can be given once a day, oral availability, absorption from the gut, stuff like that, distribution to the site of the disease, and so on. And then you have lead optimization, preclinical phase 1, and the number of molecules entering each successive phase begins to reduce. So you will see here the PTS, that is the probability rate that a molecule will succeed and go on to the next stage. So you see that the success rate is indeed pretty high when you have hit and then you're modifying the hit to a lead and optimizing the lead and going into preclinicals. But then you see that in clinical development, it is called the valley of death, because the success rate in phase 1 studies, even in preclinical studies, it goes down to 69%. So only about 70% of drugs that you test in animals will be found suitable to take to phase 1 and clinical trials. But when you go to phase 1, only 50% will succeed to go into phase 2. In phase 1, you will find that the pharmacokinetics is not good enough. So you have to drop that molecule. In phase 2, that is the real problem, because in phase 2, you have to prove efficacy, proof of concept, that it actually works. And it needs to work much better than the drugs that are available in the marketplace already. Even if it works quite well, but not as well as something that was discovered earlier, then you have to drop that product, because it will not sell. The product in the market is already there and it is doing quite well. It will be an uphill task for you to sell a product which does not give efficacy of an equal level. So only a third of the drugs that get into phase 2 will come out of phase 2 and go to phase 3. And then phase 3, of course, you have somewhat better success rates. And then submission and launch, sometimes the product will not be approved even by the regulatory authority. So that is the kind of difference that you see. And it takes more than 10 years and over $2 billion for products to be taken through this entire cycle. So it's a costly thing. And at the same time, uh, it is, sorry, I was getting a call. It takes a long time and it takes a lot of money. Now, let me talk about the pharmaceutical value chain. So, we've talked about development of new drugs, discovery, development, and then going into the market. Now, once it is in the market, what happens? This is a cross sectional view. You have the manufacturing location manufacturing the drug. First, an active ingredient will be manufactured, then, that active ingredient will be converted into a formulation, and then the formulation will be packaged, and then it will be transported. So, that is called distribution. And it will go into the distribution chain where there are wholesalers and there are retailers, and it will be transported. And it's there are CNF agents, or carrying and forwarding agents, as they are called, and then the wholesalers and retailers. And then the value of the product also keeps going up because it becomes more and more expensive because the active ingredient might be pretty inexpensive. But as you formulate it, the cost increases. As you package it, the cost increases further. The transportation costs are there. And then the wholesale margins and the retail margins get added up. And then just by putting a product into the market and putting it in pharmacy shops does not guarantee that it will sell. Nobody will know about it, and nobody will know and have confidence in the product. First of all, they wouldn't have heard about it, and second, even if they heard about it, they may not be confident about it. So it's so the marketing of pharmaceuticals is a very important part. Without it, products will not go into the market. They will not sell sufficiently. The money that was spent in all these years of development will never be recouped or regenerated, and new money will not be available for new research and development and new medicines to come to the market. So the marketing, while sometimes, from in academic circles, we feel that, marketing is like kind of something which is a waste of money, but it is not. It is that which generates the sales. And this involves strategy, positioning of the product, the data that will go to convince people that it is a good product. The pricing has to be competitive. And all of this converts into detailing. Detailing is what these medical reps go and speak to the doctors. The advertising that you might see on televisions or other places, particularly in medical journals, publications. So any studies that have been done have to be published so that doctors get to read the science behind the molecules. There have to be doctors' meetings, prescribers' meetings, where they get the opportunity to ask questions and get their questions answered. There might be conferences and things like that. And that is how demand is generated. But that is also how marketing costs get added to the manufacturing costs and the distribution costs and the retail chain costs. But then that leads to generation of prescriptions, and the pharmaceutical industry survives. Last few slides, pharmaceutical regulations. This is a very highly regulated domain. You have international regulations from the International Council of Harmonization, which are divided into quality, safety, efficacy, and multidisciplinary modules and guidelines. And it is highly recommended that students, before they sit for their final exam and leave their academic careers, they should certainly have a look at the ICH website and understand what it is all about. Then there are regional, and ICH is it is an international guideline which is adopted by many countries as a part of their law, and there are others which adopt it just because it's available and it's easy to copy, and it is encouraged by ICH. India does not formally adopt the ICH, but we do follow a lot of the ICH principles. And when we do global development clinical trials or manufacture drugs in India for sale abroad, then we have to comply with the ICH guidelines. Then you have the regional and country regulations. If you want to sell in Brazil, then you need to be able to comply with Brazilian laws and regulations and guidelines and policies. If you want to sell in Nepal or if you want to sell in China, you have to do the same for those countries. Then there are the domestic laws in India. If we are sitting here in India and practicing pharmacology here, we need to know the Indian laws much more in greater detail. There are the national laws, the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, the Narcotics and Psychotropic Substances Act, Drugs and Magic Remedies Act, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the Patents Act, and national regulations are also there, which are not laws, but there are the drugs and cosmetic rules. There's a drug price control order. There is the Uniform Code for Pharmaceutical Marketing Practices, which governs how you can promote a medicine. And all of this has to be overseen by a quality management system within the industry, which has several layers. So at the center of this might be a clinical trial or even your promotional practices or the sale of drugs or whatever. I have taken this from a clinical research slide kit that I had. So clinical trials comes at the center, but any activity of the pharmaceutical industry will come at the center. And beyond that are standard operating procedures. These standard operating procedures incorporate the rules and regulations, the regulatory guidelines that have to be followed and complied with. For clinical trials, there is also additional layers such as monitoring and audits and governance, and it's therefore some of the other domains of the pharmaceutical industry as well. And the regulator always has the right to come and inspect your clinical trial. They are there to inspect your manufacturing location for GMP guidelines. They can come into any research facility that is doing animal testing to see whether GLP guidelines are being followed or not. So they have access. They can come into a pharmacy shop to see whether the drugs are being stored properly or not. All of that. So that's regulation and that's quality management. I don't have the time to go in great detail about it. I think we are running out of time now. So last couple of slides, 2 or 3 slides. Role of medical staff in the pharma industry. And we have various types. It's not only pharmacologists who get employment in the pharmaceutical industry. There are, of course, postgraduate physicians, and the audience today consists of postgraduate physicians who have done post-graduation in pharmacology. But there are also graduate physicians, people who just have an MBBS degree, or there might be postgraduate physicians who have a postgraduate degree in another medical specialty. It might be medicine, it might be pediatrics, it might be surgery, oncology, whatever. And there are lots of such people in the industry, cardiologists. Then there are dentists that will compete with you. There are alternative medicine physicians, those who have done medicine in Ayurveda or homeopathy or whatever. And then there is paramedical staff and nursing staff also, which they have a medical background after all. And all of these people will get employment in the form of, depending on what their degrees are and how much experience they have, they could become pharmaceutical physicians, drug safety physicians, medical monitors, paramedical and clinical research positions might be open to them, therapeutic area leadership in clinical research, and they might rise to higher positions of leadership. They might then transition to marketing or consulting activities. So there's a lot of scope for medical people in the pharmaceutical industry. Although if you take them as a percentage or proportion of the total employment that the pharmaceutical industry provides, people from a medical background are a very small minority, I must say. But what is the role of pharmacologists specifically? So you can have 2 types of pharmacologists there. You can have postgraduate medical pharmacologists. Our audience today, I would presume, is mostly that. On the other hand, there can be non-medical pharmacologists as well. So the pharmaceutical industry does employ postgraduate veterinary pharmacologists, postgraduate pharmacologists with a pharmacy degree, postgraduate pharmacologists with a science degree. So you have MSc pharmacology, you have MPharm pharmacology, and so forth. And what do they do? So you have preclinical development and animal pharmacology, which is mostly veterinary pharmacologists or laboratory pharmacologists. There could be medical pharmacologists that go there, but uh, that is a rarity. Medical pharmacologists you will not find to any great extent in the animal pharmacology domain or in the preclinical domain. Medical pharmacologists, who I call clinical pharmacologists, because anybody who's had a medical training and is an MD in pharmacology is a clinical pharmacologist. Of course, we have DM clinical pharmacologists as well, but there's not that much of a great difference between the two. And in my mind, anybody who has a medical degree and then studies pharmacology is a clinical pharmacologist. And these people will get employed as medical monitors, drug safety physicians, therapeutic area leads, or they might then transition to marketing related roles where they might be pharmaceutical physicians, medical liaison officers, product managers, or they can go on to leadership, strategy, and consulting, as I had said earlier. And we have pharmacologists who have held very senior positions in the pharmaceutical industry, though rarely will they become CEO of a multinational pharmaceutical company. That is usually reserved for people who come from the sales or the marketing or even the legal or that kind of or finance backgrounds. But nothing stops a pharmacologist from becoming, if you can master all the craft that is there across the pharmaceutical industry, then nothing stops a pharmacologist from getting to very senior positions in the industry. My topic included opportunities for outsourcing. So I have one slide here, and let me quickly go through that. Almost anything in the pharmaceutical industry can and is outsourced. So you have outsourcing of manufacturing, and these are outsourced to third-party manufacturing locations. In India, it is rampant. It is almost every big company is actually getting manufactured their products by third-party manufacturers that are not part of the same company. So you might see something from GlaxoSmithKline, but if you read the small print, it will say manufactured by some other small company and marketed by GlaxoSmithKline. So third-party manufacturers manufacture pharmaceutical products with loan licenses. But this is usually happens when the drug is in the generic space. It has lost its patent, and it can be sold as a generic drug. That is where third-party manufacturers usually come in. The new drugs are often manufactured by the innovator themselves. Formulation development, you have formulation CROs, you have distribution people, that is the international drug distribution companies like ZS or CNF agents, carrying and forwarding agents, and each company has a contract with one carrying forwarding agent that does their work. Drug discovery research, there are discovery research CROs. I used to work for one of them, GVK Biosciences, whose main activity was in the chemistry space. Animal studies, there are non-clinical CROs, and then there are clinical CROs.
Time has exceeded the presentation.
Yes. So this is indeed my last slide. So there are many kinds of outsourcing. And clinical trials outsourcing is the important thing that I think there'll be more presentations on later. Current and future developments, we are seeing growth in biotechnology and personalized medicine, growth in contract research organizations, site management organizations that manage the sites. There's a rise in the global capability centers, and that is where a lot of the opportunity for employment is now arising in India. There's a growing importance of real world evidence, and a lot of work is happening in that space. The startup ecosystem in India is very ripe, and there are employment opportunities there. The technology sphere and IT companies are now beginning to hire pharmacologists and other people from the healthcare space. And finally, people can transition from one area to the other, as we've seen within organizations or into entirely different domains. I am myself an example. I used to work for the pharmaceutical industry, and now I work for a hospital. So these things keep changing. So this is my last slide. The pharmaceutical industry is a very big place. A few minutes, 40 minutes or an hour is not sufficient to talk about the entire industry. But hopefully you've got a broad general idea of what the pharmaceutical industry is about. There will be others who will go into specifics in particular domains within the pharmaceutical industry. And I wish the audience here a wonderful program to go through and a good learning about the pharmaceutical industry. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, we are happy to take them now.
Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee. I think that was really wonderful. I completely agree with you that 40 minutes doesn't justify the time to really cover this topic. But I would say that you have covered it comprehensively, the various areas that the industry encompasses. So there are multiple questions that are coming in from the group. But as I get onto that, Dr. Mukherjee, you've been a doyen in the industry. You are still a doyen in the industry. It's more than 3 decades that you've seen the industry evolve over the last 3 decades, and there have been multiple ups and downs. So now for the pharmaceutical physicians that are coming in, especially the medical pharmaceutical physicians who are coming in, what is your advice? How do they look at building their career? Because the opportunity is enormous currently. So how do you what is that you would like to tell them? How do they shape their career in the industry, evolving industry? What do you?
So, one is while students are there and they are students still and studying pharmacology, it's very important to get a very good hold on the subject, because it's not as if engineering graduates, they go and they start working for banks and their domain is of no use to them. However, that's not the case with pharmacology and with medicine. Medical people come into the pharmacology because of their knowledge of medicine and because of their knowledge of pharmacology. So it is very important to get a very good hold, and this is the last time that you will get. Of course, in the industry also you'll learn a lot about particular, but it becomes narrower and narrower as we go along. So this broad understanding of the principles of pharmacology and the principles of medicine, indeed, and therapeutics, is what they should do first of all. And thereafter, there are many other skills that are required. And if they can hone their skills, because they will never have that kind of time once they join the industry. So if you want to be successful in the industry, the foundation is when you are students. So, and that foundation has to be built on being able to speak to larger audiences, being able to convey your point. One thing that I tell all my students is that it is so important to listen. Listening skills in this country especially, I see nobody teaches, and listening is the most important thing, because unless you listen, you will not understand what the other guy is saying. There's no communication thereafter. You will be saying something and the other guy will be saying something. You will never. In the industry, it is so important to listen to because you are not the master of all the domains, and it is a multidisciplinary function. You must know what the sales guy is wanting to say. You must understand, make him. So we used to have this active listening sessions where we would be taught how to actively listen, and it would be the sales guys that would actually teach us how to do this. That you listen, then you try to understand. If you don't understand, you ask again, so forth. So that's the next thing. So these soft domains are there. And finally, you need to have a business sense, beginning to understand what matters at the end of the day, and not be blatantly, money minded on the one hand, and be able to mix both sides. That you need to understand that revenues and profits are important, but at the other hand, you must also understand the politics of all of this, and what is politically correct to say, what is kind of polished way of putting things, and those come after a little time, I'm sure.
Absolutely, Dr. Mukherjee. Very well said. There are some questions in the chat, and I will just quickly. So if you could, the regulations are changing. Every country's regulations are evolving. It's becoming better and better and better. So, any thoughts on how the Indian regulations differ with the FDA regulations? Any top one or two takeaways for the students?
Sure, you will be, touching a raw spot with many people in the industry, I'm sure. Indian regulations have always been very different from the rest of the world. Uh, Thankfully, they are improving now and we are coming closer and closer to harmonization. But that can be said for many other countries. Japan's regulations were very different from the rest of the world a few decades ago. They have moved much closer. They have realized and they have harmonized. So now ICH. In India also, I think the ICH guidelines have become kind of acceptable. And even in NDCT 2019, they say that if you follow ICH guidelines, then that is also okay. Or if you aren't following it, at least you should follow the Indian guidelines. So both are acceptable. So Indian regulations are improving, and but then there are still large differences. Some differences. All my life, in fact, all these 30 years, I have been fortunate or unfortunate enough to have to bring these matters to a level of discussion with the regulators and with government authorities. Even the last time, just last week, I had a meeting I was participating in, and I brought up the point of ethics committees and how there's this 50-kilometer rule and why that should be there, what is the reason for that, and so on and so forth. There are so many other rules that are there that limit how quickly we can do research and how easily. So the Prime Minister has been talking of ease of doing business. And I'm saying let's also have ease of doing research so that, and I was suggesting this to Dr. Y.K. Gupta, why don't we have a comprehensive list of all the hurdles that are there to do research, and then one by one look at each of them and see what is the reason for this. Can we have it any easier than what it is, or is it a must we have it this way, or is there a better way to do this? And then for all those which do not have a very strong reason to be there, we should strike them off the list. And I think the audience at that time did take it quite well. So that's what I'd say. There are a lot of gaps still there. I think India should become a signatory to ICH, or at least, there's the Global Cooperation Group in ICH. And if they can join the Global Cooperation Group, that will be a good thing.
Absolutely. I would say that the one who's asked the question, I think it's important that you go through the FDA guidance documents. The FDA guidance document is a wonderful document that is very well written, very well researched, and that will actually give you a wonderful idea about the particular therapy area or the development of a drug or a therapy in that particular therapy area. So please, I would recommend each one of you to go through the US FDA documents, and that will really help you. So, Professor Mukherjee, this group is a Gen Z group. This group believes in everything being digitally available, being digitally done. So they see a lot of influence of AI in their day-to-day life, and they see that that's going to eat away their roles and responsibilities in the pharmaceutical industry. Is it true, or is it a myth?
Only time will tell, Senthil. Only time will tell. But not immediately. Certainly not immediately. And I have heard people, doyens of AI, who have said that look, any new technology, when it comes in, there is always the scare. Even when computers came in, there was so much resistance that we don't want to work with computers because it will take away our jobs. So computers will do everything on their own. Now we are saying that AI will do everything on their own. After all, somebody has to, kind of deploy the AI, make sure that the AI is doing the right job. So things will become easier, but that will only open up time for us to do other things better. Right now, I'm sure it is the case with everybody that is in a senior position, and even students, are very busy. But I find that in my job here, I don't have a moment's time. If an AI machine could do half my job, I would be the happiest person, in the world.
Absolutely.
So right now, sir, does AI and ML is it being actually used in the drug discovery process?
Oh, yes, it is being used in a massive way which we can't even imagine. And I come to know about it because there are companies that from abroad, mostly, that are approaching hospitals asking for data. And I ask, why do you want this data? So they're saying that we want to run AI algorithms on this data to identify what kind of drugs we should be developing, where are the gaps in therapeutics, what are the targets that we should be, what drugs are working better in through RWE studies, and analyzing those RWE studies through artificial intelligence. We want to find out connections between things that happen to patients now, which the human eye cannot catch, because you will be able to catch that only if the human mind was to be able to wrap around millions of patients data. But we can't do that, obviously. We can only at the most analyze 200, 300, 500 patient data, and if there are big differences, then we can find that out. But small connections where small influences add up to a big effect, those things we cannot comprehend. And companies are doing that for discovery research. They're also doing all kinds of modeling, and this modeling is going into the artificial intelligence sphere. Of course, we've had modeling in pharmacokinetics and pharmacology for quite some time, but now artificial intelligence is coming into that, so that the models are becoming much more sophisticated and therefore much more higher predictive value. So that's happening in clinical trials. I believe, simple things like large language models are beginning to write protocols for you, and they will give you a draft protocol, but you will still have to go through that protocol and make sure that they have not made mistakes, or so some stupid thing has not happened there. So those things are still there.
So training in AI ML is going to help students.
Yes, yes. AI/ML is going to come in a very big way. There is no doubt about it. And the movement towards that is very swift. So, for clinical trials, for example, we are not able to find patients for clinical trials. Maybe artificial intelligence is able to work through. Of course, you have inclusion and exclusion criteria, but how do you identify patients who are no longer not coming to the hospital? You could contact them, you can get them to participate in a clinical trial because they are chronic patients, but difficult to identify sometimes. So people are using AI. I'm not quite sure how they are using it. I also have doubts whether AI can do that or not. But I'm told that's happening.
So maybe a couple of questions on career apart from AI and ML is genetic pool, pharmacogenomics. Where do you see that coming up now? And if anybody's interested in this, is this the right space to be in?
Yeah, so pharmacogenomics, and it is tied to individualized medicine. And I think the future holds individualized medicine as something that we will be moving more and more towards. So, right now, today, we have individualized medicine for a few categories of cancer. You go into genomics, you find out whether a patient is HER2 positive or not, or whether there is something there or not, and then accordingly you give the medicine. So that is some kind of individualization, but it is still pretty high level individualization. I think that's another place where artificial intelligence will come in to parse the polygenic risk. So, and the concept of polygenic risk is something that our pharmacologists must begin to understand. So, you have monogenic risk. Monogenic risk is that you have a single gene that is aberrant, and that leads to high lipid levels, familial hyperlipidemia, let's say. But on the other hand, you might have no single gene that has a great risk, but there are many small genes which lead to small amount of risk for hypercholesterolemia. And all those, if they just happen to be there in one person, because we are a world of 8 billion people, so there are many opportunities for 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 15, 20 genes to come together and contribute to risk. And that risk is called polygenic risk. Not each of the single genes will not have much risk, but all of them come together and give you high risk. So if medicines are able to address polygenic risk, uh, I don't know how, but it's possible. And if medicines are able to be individualized depending on what genes an individual carries, and then and we would then be using artificial intelligence to even tell us which patient would be a good candidate for which drug. And so the artificial intelligence will draw up a prescription that these are the drugs, combination of 3 drugs that you should give to this patient. And this other patient should not receive any one of them. He should receive a few others, which are not good for this one because the first patient would have adverse events because of that. So that's where we are going towards, and individualized medicine and genomics will play a very big role.
Absolutely. So there's a paucity of time, and I think our next speakers and moderators are also waiting for the next session. So I would take this opportunity to really thank you, Dr. Mukherjee. It's really wonderful again meeting you, interacting with you, and being on the panel, being in the session where you are speaking. It's wonderful always to hear you. Thank you, Dr. Maxine, for being here, being the co-host and the co-moderator for the session. Thank you so much. And I would now leave the floor to Reshma. Over to you.
Great. Thank you. I would just like to have a word of thanks for the moderators, Dr. Senthil, Dr. Bharti, and the organizers of this session. Thank you so much for having me here and giving me this opportunity to talk to students. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that elaborate session. And thank you, Senthil sir and Bharti ma'am, for moderating the session and having a very interactive discussion. We will now move to the second part of the session. I wish to introduce our moderators for the second session. I'm just sharing my slide. Yes. I wish to introduce Dr. Pankaj Gupta, who's a Senior Director, Medical Affairs at Pfizer India. Sir was the former Chief Scientific Officer at Novartis India. Dr. Gupta has significant professional experience in public health administration and pharma marketing and clinical research. Sir too holds an MBBS and MD degrees from Grant Medical College and SET Mumbai Medical College, Mumbai. He has a fellowship in clinical sciences and has completed his management training from XLRI Jamshedpur. Something about Dr. Pankaj Gupta, sir, is personally passionate about transforming clinical practice for ensuring better patient access and outcomes. So he strives to do this by his extensive experience in strategic medical affairs and clinical research, as well as ensuring integrated evidence generation and market access and healthcare systems partnerships. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Dr. Pankaj, over to you.
Thanks, Reshma. Appreciate it. Just a quick check. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Perfect. At the outset, I just first want to thank the National Association of Pharmacology and Therapeutics for this wonderful initiative, and also for giving me an opportunity to contribute. It's my honor and privilege to introduce my co-moderator for the session, Dr. Nitya Gupte. Dr. Gupte is the professor and head at the Department of Clinical Pharmacology at KM Hospital, Mumbai. She has been a former editor of the Journal of Postgraduate Medicine and a former member of the advisory board of the British Journal of Clinical Pharmacology. She also chairs the ethics committee at PD Hinduja Hospital, Mumbai. And there could be so much more that I could say. There could be several more slides that will be dedicated to our introduction. Such has been her illustrious professional journey. But it would be my honor if Dr. Gupte, you allow me to introduce you as my guru. And to let me thank you on this platform for being such a source of inspiration during my time at KM Hospital several moons ago, where you gave me an opportunity to pursue a fellowship in clinical sciences under your tutelage. Pleasure to introduce you, Dr. Gupte, and I hand it over to you to introduce the speaker for the session. Reshma, was I audible? Or was
Yes, sir. No, you were audible, sir. I think Nitya ma'am's muted, so we have to unmute.
You'll have to allow her to
Yeah, madam has joined or she was on leave?
Ma'am is joined. Ma'am is here.
Okay.
You have to allow her to unmute. She is not able to.
Okay.
Madam, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Nitya, madam, please unmute.
There seems to be a technical glitch, Dr.
And now
Kamal. I think she's not able to.
Yeah, please unmute
Yeah.
Dr. Nitya, madam. Yeah, you are audible. Thank you.
Dr. Kamal and organizers of this certificate course, thank you so much for allowing me to moderate this session. I'd like to introduce Dr. Viraj Suvarna. He's an independent medical consultant who retired in 2025. I think it's the industry's loss, really. Viraj has been a top ranker MBBS MD. He has 50 plus publications and he has authored a book, No Medical, No Business. The last time I heard Viraj, I think, was when he was the keynote speaker for the Canvas of Clinical Pharmacology workshop at KEM. Viraj is a brilliant orator, a most wonderful person. And I think Viraj's knowledge really goes beyond what he's going to tell you today. He's an avid reader, extremely wide read. And every time I've met Viraj, I've learned from him. So over to you, Viraj. He's going to talk to us about medical affairs, global and Indian perspective, and clinical trial management. And thank you, Pankaj, for a very, very kind introduction. And I would request you to close the session as well, as told to me by the organizers. Viraj, over to you. Look forward to hearing you. Absolute honor and privilege.
No. The honor and privilege is actually my honor and privilege to have you as the moderator. Of course, Pankaj as well. So if I can now, I'll just share. Yeah. Okay. Can you all see my slide?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Okay. So I'll try to finish this as quickly as I can in 30 minutes so that then we have more time for interaction. And as the topic, what Nitya shared with you all, obviously, since I have been more in India rather than global, I can talk more about it from an Indian perspective. But obviously, I am aware of global medical affairs as well. So I'll try to cover both and then, of course, talk about clinical trial management. So here, what you'll see is a comparison. And obviously, one thing that clearly comes across is everywhere you will see global and on this side, local. So basically, when you look at global medical affairs, it's more in terms of deciding something from a global perspective for all the countries where this particular multinational company is having its affiliates, of course, from headquarter perspective. And within an affiliate, like in India, naturally you need to localize whatever has been decided at a global level. Now, be it in medical affairs per se, but obviously medical affairs doesn't work in isolation. So clinical development, clinical operations, then of course regulatory affairs, pharmacovigilance, quality. So everything then has to be a bit localized, and naturally from country to country there would be certain differences. So that is up to the Indian medical affairs team to then in line with, so align to the global whatever clinical development or medical affairs plan, try and align it, but at the same time there could be certain differences which of course the global team will allow you to further leverage on, provided you're able to present it well to them. So that is important. Now, here only one point I'll talk about is where I put ICER, incremental cost effectiveness ratio threshold. So as we know in other countries where you have reimbursed markets, what happens is eventually people calculate this ICER, and then based on the threshold that is acceptable in that particular market. So if it's nice in the UK, then they generally go by, I think, 20,000 pounds sterling. If it's the US, it's $30,000. But the point is that the cost effectiveness of that product based on the data that you've generated, both in randomized controlled clinical trials and then more importantly in the real world. If it's below that, then it's acceptable and gets reimbursed. Otherwise, it won't get reimbursed. Now, to be able to do that, I was just thinking if medical affairs can be involved in the entire global clinical development plan, such that when you design the study itself, you know that this is the threshold, and eventually the way you design your study and generate that data, if it's able to reach that particular threshold, as in below that, then you know it's reimbursable. Otherwise, it's not. So maybe medical affairs can provide certain inputs at a global level, which will help in reimbursement. India, of course, as you know, 80% is out of pocket. So here it becomes more difficult, and you need to do what are called as local value dossiers. So locally, with the local data available, we'll have to decide what really is the value of this product in terms of cost effectiveness. So actually, if you look at incremental cost effectiveness ratio or ICER, it's nothing but on top, the numerator will be the cost of drug A versus the cost of drug B, and in the denominator is the effectiveness of drug A and the effectiveness of drug B. But when you look at cost, it's not just the price of that particular product. When we look at cost, it's the overall cost of illness, which of course now when you use a particular drug, how much of that cost actually comes down. I'll talk more about it. I have another slide a little later. But right now, I just want to say this is one difference where you'll be able to do something at a global level, and okay, at an Indian level, till reimbursement really picks up. I know about 20% you obviously have to present to these government kind of bodies like railways and armed forces, CGHS, ESIS, etc., and even the state governments. And there, if you can convince them about the value of cost effectiveness and your product is on the formulary, obviously, and especially these premium priced patent protected products can be accommodated. But otherwise, in the out of pocket kind of market, it's difficult to be able to afford such innovation. So that is something that we need to understand. And I'll talk about these other differences as I go through the subsequent slides. Now, actually, this entire presentation is based on what was told to us that go about it in this format. So I'm sticking to that format. It's a good format. So one is when you look at the functions, when you talk of medical affairs, strategic and scientific. So in strategic, I thought let's just try and understand what is strategy, because people keep talking about strategy. So, okay. It could be a plan, but not just a plan. It's a framework for making decisions and taking actions that will lead to desired outcomes. But it is also about deciding what not to do. In fact, Steve Jobs, when he came back to Apple, I mean, he was sacked and then he had to come back. At that point in time, he realized that Apple was doing so many projects, and he decided the first thing would be to decide some projects let's not do. Let's just focus on a few and then make each product really big. And that's what he did. And I remember when I joined Pfizer, and Shoaib Mukherjee, in fact, was my line manager. At that time, Pfizer also was, before all those mergers happened, few products, but each product we really, really invested and made it a brand. And we really made it a big brand. So that is important. And then when I come to what is brand or the medical strategy for the brand, because obviously there's a marketing strategy as well. As Shoaib also said, what is important is your subject matter expertise. So you really need to, just because you finished your MD in pharmacology, it doesn't mean you stop reading now because you finished all your exams. Here, in fact, you have to go really, really in depth. So that is important. So in-depth reading. And one area could be, guidelines, because guidelines, if you read those guidelines towards the end, they also talk about certain areas where you need data, you need some research to, happen there, because otherwise those guidelines won't be able to come up with recommendations because there's no evidence. So you need to understand the unmet medical needs of that market, disease area, therapeutic area, the indication. And then, of course, you'll be able to decide in your medical or brand strategy what really should come. Of course, the other way of knowing is interacting freely with internal customers like your sales and marketing colleagues. But why only them? Even within the medical team, you have clinical operations, you have regulatory affairs, you have pharmacovigilance, you have quality, and within medical affairs, medical information. There's no harm in interacting with them as well, so that you learn, something of what they tell you. It may be useful, and plus they will also benefit. So let's look at it as a kind of two-way interaction. And obviously, if you're working in a multinational company, it needs to be aligned with a global strategy, which global medical affairs will give you. But then, since you're in India and working in the Indian affiliate, you will need to also understand that there are certain things which are a little bit different. So as long as it's broadly aligned, global will be okay with it. And then, of course, when I come to the scientific aspect of the function, again, the in-depth knowledge of course, not just the brand, you need to understand the therapeutic area around the brand, the indications. Then, of course, it's not just about understanding, but then you should know how to then apply those learnings for the business and then also be able to communicate. And here, the way you communicate is one is to the field force and even marketing colleagues who are not doctors, but yet they're pretty good at understanding and knowing the market and maybe even some aspects of the product or broadly the treatment because they have learned from their customers, the doctors. So let's keep that in mind. But how well are you able to communicate to them is important. And that's why I've written that in parenthesis, communication skill. But as I think Shoaib also said, you need to understand how to communicate, what to communicate, when to communicate, to whom to communicate, how to communicate. So here, what I'm trying to say is that word skill, S, which comes at the beginning of that word, imagine if it moves to the end of the word, then it will read as skills. So communication is like a double-edged sword. It can be very useful when it's a good skill, but at the same time, if you don't use it well, it can kill the relationship. And lastly, of course, compliance is very important because medical affairs is the custodian of healthcare compliance. See, in any company, there will be a legal and compliance function which oversees all the buckets of compliance, one of which is healthcare compliance. But as far as the medical director and medical affairs in particular are concerned, they deal with healthcare compliance on a daily basis. So obviously, the head of legal and compliance will kind of want the medical director and medical affairs in particular to help him or her in ensuring that compliance happens. And what you see in parentheses again here is just the definition of vascular compliance, change in volume of that blood vessel per unit change in pressure. Why did I put this? Is because let's understand that in the pharmaceutical world, it's all about sometimes, achieving monthly, quarterly targets. So there's a lot of pressure also that the sales force has to bear because, people from head office will want them to increase volume of sales. And ultimately, too much of pressure and, so it can affect compliance. And compliance is such that you can't be too compliant. And if you're too rigid, also, what happens to blood vessels. Why you have hypertension because elastin gets replaced by collagen in the blood vessel in the arteries. And similarly, you can't be too lax also because then there's vasodilation, fall in blood pressure, a shock-like situation. So you need to understand what is compliance. And that's why medical affairs, it's not a very easy job because it's literally like you're walking on that thin kind of dividing line or a tightrope, balancing yourself. On one side, you have the need of the business, the company that you're working for. On the other hand, obviously, the medical community, the patients, and of course, you have SOPs of the company as well as the applicable local regulatory and legal requirements. So you need to be really, really good in your balance. Brand strategy, as I've already told you, besides the gaps, in fact, a lot of market research is done. My thought is market research, when you ask certain doctors a few questions, they give you answers which may or may not necessarily reflect what they actually do in practice. So it's always better to be able to get data and accurate data. That's what I call medical research. It's not that easy because It has to be done quickly, and you need to know of all the people who have that particular disease, how many of them are aware of it, of those aware, how many actually, uh, you know, come for treatment, and then in terms of their, or even come for treatment before that becomes the diagnosis part, so whether that's happening correctly, and then moving on to treatment, and then even the treatment, are they really compliant, and therefore are they well controlled? What about complications that develop if they are not well controlled? So that kind of data is not that easy to get. But at the same time, if it's based on data rather than just what doctors tell you, I feel it will be more accurate when you make your forecast or business estimates. Then, as I told you, clinical operations, regulatory affairs can also really help you. And then what we also do is, obviously, we need to really select key opinion leaders who really can give us that kind of advice, of course, in alignment with marketing and sales. But we are the ones who should ideally be accountable and responsible for that board. And then during such meetings, which happen even before launch, we can present on the product, as in the need for such a product, despite availability of other, uh, drugs in the standard of care. And then, of course, present the product, the data, answer their questions, and then you can ask them questions, and maybe they will give you the kind of answers you need. Later on, of course, if you want doctors to even speak at meetings, you could select what are called as advocates. So initially, they're very good speakers. They're not maybe as big as the advisors, key opinion leaders, but they're really good speakers. People come to listen to them. And at such advocacy board meetings, you present to them, and then ultimately a particular slide deck gets firmed up. Everyone is on the same page. They've understood the data. And then when they go out and speak, and obviously the more they speak, gradually a speaker can actually eventually become an advocate for the brand. But of course, we don't influence that. It's ultimately entirely dependent on those doctors. And that's why it's important for medical affairs to be in charge of all this rather than sales or marketing. Then, of course, your doctors who are investigators in the global trials, especially those pivotal trials where India was also part of the global clinical development plan, that data goes to the regulator, and that's how eventually we get the approval. So those doctors can actually speak at advisory board meetings, even at launch meetings, because they've used the product, so they can speak from that experience. So that's useful. Then, of course, we have this thing called as the visual aid, which now is no longer like a hard copy. It's more like an iPad. But the whole point of the visual aid is, if with all the data that you're showing, if you can aid the doctors in visualizing the best patient for that particular product, that is what the doctor wants to know, rather than just keep on harping on my product is better than somebody else's product. Because let's understand, in a parallel group design, patients in, say, arm A are never really exposed to the drug used in arm B. How do I know that particular patient, if he or she was exposed to that drug in arm B, would have responded better or not? Because, see, in a clinical trial, I understand why such a design is used. But in the real world, ultimately, when you extrapolate, it is to that, and Shoaib also mentioned this, individualized medicine. I know some people call it personal or precision, but eventually it is for that one patient that the doctor sees. How much of that data is extrapolatable to that patient? That is what the doctor wants to know, rather than whether your drug is better than somebody else's drug. Similarly, publications as a strategy. So it's not like doctor says, I've used your product, this is my data, can you help me publish? That is simple, it's reactive. But as a strategy, if you wish to have certain publications, that will help your particular brand, because there is an unmet need, there is a gap in local medical literature, which such evidence generation will really plug. So that becomes a strategy. Similarly, local clinical development. Globally, people have done whatever they could, and they will keep on doing it till the patent is alive. But locally, can you not also think in terms of, maybe you need some data generation? You could either do it yourself, that means a company sponsored study, or it could be an investigator initiated study. So this has to be investigator initiated, not that you initiate and then you get an investigator to say yes for that study. And then, of course, as Shoaib mentioned, real world evidence is also becoming extremely important. Now, here again, it could be just data that's available. Maybe some hospitals in India have good quality electronic health records. But the second could be here also you can actually plan a prospective real world evidence generating project rather than just take available data and analyze. That also can be done retrospective. There would be certain caveats to that, but it's okay. I mean, it's part of real world evidence. And finally, of course, why not pharmacovigilance or even the quality department? There also, they could give you certain ideas and you could take their help in coming out with certain projects which can differentiate your product, because ultimately, let's understand, it's all about differentiation and being distinct. So when I look at data and then value, because ultimately value is what the doctor has to be convinced of, because then he can in turn convey it to the patient. So data is data, but then when you give meaning to that data, when you analyze it, you get information. Then when you publish it, obviously it's evidence. But in the process, as data gets converted to value, first, of course, you should understand the data properly. So that's data literacy. And obviously, a pharmacologist can really help here. Then, of course, can I visualize this data rather than only text? And finally, the story. It has to be a logical, sequential flow of thought. And then once the doctor understands it, obviously, he or she is more likely to recommend it for the patient. And then, of course, the patient also needs to decide, because let's understand EBM or evidence-based medicine is not just about evidence or the doctor's expertise based on clinical acumen. There's another E, which is the expectation of the patient, the values, preferences. That also is a part of EBM. And finally, when I say WIII-FM, so like radio FM, so the FM or the frequency modulation channel, you need to be able to tune into that channel if you really want belief to shift and behavior to shift. So what is in it? WIII. What is in it for me and my patient? If that I understand, yes, the belief in your company, your product will shift in the doctor's mind, because the battle is in the mind of the doctor and not in the marketplace. And then, of course, that doctor's patient. So then belief shifts and then behavior shifts. But at the same time, when we talk so much about evidence, and this is where perhaps AI, I mean, I know AI can even circumvent this and be able to decide which evidence is really, really the evidence that I need to look at and which evidence I should not look at. So obviously, people can program it in such a way that it will look at only evidence which is obviously authentic or robust. And then if you make your, whatever analysis and decision, it's fine. But otherwise, evidence can be biased. And the only difference between based and biased is the letter I or the trained eye, which is able to sift the wheat from the chaff. And then if you're able to know, oh, this is the kind of evidence. So based on that, yes, I mean, but it's not just evidence. So an MD pharmacology professional who is in the medical affairs team of a company, a pharmaceutical company, can actually lead medical strategy just as the product manager does it from a marketing perspective. He or she can do it from a medical perspective, so strategy. Then, of course, the scientific engagement, internal customer training, and act as a bridge between clinical evidence, product development, ethical communication. See, this is very important, that when a doctor speaks to other doctors, they believe you, but you also need to be credible, which means don't become, that's why I keep telling medical advisors, be dispassionate, DIS passionate, and not this THIS passionate, because then the doctor is able to understand, oh, this guy is like, sales or marketing. So you need to understand that you have to keep some kind of a distance between yourself and the product, dispassionately evaluate the evidence, but at the same time, there's an art and science to medical affairs. And this is something that I learned from Schäuble himself. And many others, of course. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you have to be credible, like, I'll give you one quick example. In Pfizer, we had this study called EGAST. And in that study, we looked at the antimicrobial susceptibility of different organisms to different antimicrobials. And we had the product called cefoperazone sulbactam, but there was another product called piperacillin tazobactam. And in that study, the gram-positive bacteria actually were more sensitive to piperacillin tazobactam, but we showed it as is. And a doctor, I remember still in Cochin, he got up and he said, this kind of a presentation I've not even seen from key opinion leaders. Because see, sometimes with doctors who are paid speakers, they're paid to speak in a particular way. Whereas when we select speakers, I tell them, you are free to speak your mind. Please don't feel that just because we're going to pay you a fair market value honorarium that you have to speak a particular language. No, this is your presentation. You're free to make changes also. But of course, in the agreement, then all that will be very clearly stipulated, because ultimately the doctor has to own it. So when we present, we own, yes, the brand and the data that we have generated. But at the same time, we know how to present it in a manner that is believable, credible, and then it helps the doctor to be empowered with the right information to make the right decision for his or her individual patients. So in lead medical strategy, it's the voice of the patient, which again, medical affairs can really represent. Without, here also there is a bit of a problem that you can't be in direct touch with the patient. So sometimes, patient advocacy groups and, person from that tag will have to be in touch with us. There are certain rules around that. In scientific engagement, as I said, it's not just about, doing meetings just because, you need to communicate something. You have to design that meeting in such a way that you create a pull so that the doctor is literally driven to attend the meeting, and not driven as in you give him a car and then he comes there. No, he should want to attend that meeting. So if that is possible, then yes, that's a great meeting. And finally, when you're training also, this I learned when I joined the industry way back in 1998. I was told that, see, even when you're presenting to your field force, please understand you need to, in inverted commas, sell the product to the field force, because if the field force is not sold on the product, how will they be able to sell it to their doctors? So that is important. The second thing is, let's understand this is the only selling profession where the buyer knows more than the seller. I mean, the doctor, although he doesn't buy, the patient buys, but he's the main person based on which the patient will make that decision. So you need to understand, the way you train the field force, the medical representative has to literally represent what medical stands for. And when he presents, he or she, he may know more than the doctor on the product, but yet he has to diplomatically, tactfully convey it so that the doctor doesn't feel as if he's being taught. But in those days, the Pfizer medical reps used to actually educate doctors, and doctors would actually like it. And sometimes medical advisors feel tired of, training, because there's a lot of attrition in the field force. So very often, maybe every 1 or 2 months, you have to train a new batch on the same agenda. But how I look at it is, it's still okay because the people are different who you're training. And every time you train, every time you teach, you learn from the questions they ask you. And then you can keep modifying your presentation. So there's nothing wrong in even taking 6 or whatever number of training sessions for the field force in a year. Then, of course, we should think of these are just examples, what you could do. So one is, of course, a program like Bridge with key opinion leaders, with key institutes, where there's a lot of stuff that you can do, which is academic, educational, but at the same time, there will be a business element to it, because nobody is here to do charity. But what we do is we do stuff that the institute values. Could be conducting a good clinical research practice workshop or whatever it is that the institute wants. And obviously, there's no quid pro quo. We just do it and that's it. Of course, the field force could be involved in conducting the meeting or, the snacks or the lunch or whatever. But the content is delivered, and not only by us, it's tripartite. So there could be faculty from the company, from the institute, as well as maybe an independent, unbiased expert. So this way, the institute actually really values this association. And of their own, they may decide that if this is what the company stands for, perhaps the product also, they view it in the same way, and hopefully it helps them in deciding what to put on the hospital formulary. Then, of course, product development. This I learned recently from my colleague in, I think, IPCA, where he said, see, in clopidogrel, we know about this CYP2C19 and the interactions that can happen. But that's because clopidogrel is the active drug. But the prodrug, and then it has to be converted to an active metabolite. But now what they're doing is actually coming out with the active metabolite rather than the prodrug, so that then they don't need to worry too much about these drug-drug interaction. Now, this is a local innovation that he thought of. So that is also something MD pharmacologists can do. And I would actually advise you to read a particular article which Dr. Nani Wadekar has written in the very first edition of Perspectives in Clinical Research, a journal which is the official journal of the Indian Society for Clinical Research. And if you read that, you'll realize how he also was able to facilitate a lot of such local innovative studies, which doctors, of course, on their own wanted to do. And it's really fascinating how you can still do that kind of work. And this, of course, I have already covered. This is just to give you a pictorial representation of how, you can bridge this kind of connect between key opinion leaders and a company, bringing them closer to the company, so that tomorrow, even if you leave, you don't really take those relationships with you, because you're bringing those doctors closer to the company. And that's important. And then there are different ways in which this can be done. A core curriculum, I don't have time to go through the entire thing, but in a lot of medical ways, you can actually get these doctors to really be good in their own clinical practice, but at the same time, they understand the industry better. And not all industry is mercenary the way people think it is. And then this is the other part. We talk so much about these randomized controlled clinical trials, and then we present to doctors, but even at a field force level, are they really trained in being able to extrapolate? So here, what I'm trying to tell you is, you can call it trial and error. An error can stand for extrapolating results from randomized controlled clinical trials to the real world. Because see, a doctor is okay understanding what happened in that RCT, but how much of that is extrapolatable to my practice? So interpretation and then extrapolation. That is where, again, a pharmacologist can really make a big difference. I don't know why okay. Then, of course, there are other functional areas like cross-functional collaboration, medical information, publication and strategy. And actually, I have slides for each of these, so I won't spend time on this slide. This is just to give you a slew of different engagements, medical, scientific, clinical engagements that you can do with doctors, even around pharmacovigilance or disease management, outcomes research, or pharmacoeconomics, et cetera. And doctors would really value this because they haven't really been exposed to all this. External medical affairs, this I learned in Pfizer, where medical actually partners with academia, with the government, and medical or professional societies. And here again, it's a lot of medical, clinical, that kind of engagement happening. And ultimately, it really helps in the healthcare ecosystem, whatever, meeting their unmet medical needs, but they also look at industry in a different way. Healthcare leadership is also something I learned at Pfizer, where you can do so much for doctors. For example, they did a survey among doctors just to understand the problems that doctors face. Sometimes there's corporatization of healthcare. Then, of course, the trust between patient and doctor, and that also we are observing now. So many problems that doctors have, or even with media. So can we then try and help these doctors through some experts in respective fields? And these kind of workshops also can help. And it's for mainly the administrators of these hospitals who actually learn healthcare leadership. And then they go back and apply those learnings. They come up with projects. And then we can have at the end of the year, even an annual kind of, a meeting where you can give prizes to the projects that did really well. And again, an independent jury deciding on who gets the prizes. Now I'll come quickly to, a little bit of clinical development. So we know why real world evidence, because obviously there are differences between what happens in an RCT and the real world. So when you do real world studies the right way, you're actually complementing whatever RCTs have given you and trying to bridge whatever gaps do remain in the extrapolation from RCT to the real world. Regulatory considerations, well, if they are purely observational, non-interventional, uh, one could argue that they're outside the purview of NDACT, because what NDACT also says, NDACT is New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules, is that if based on the results of that study, you're not going to come to the regulator and ask for a change in the label in terms of an indication change, etc., then it's okay. They don't want to really have a look at it. But they also, in I think the FAQ booklet, they have mentioned that you need to still send it to us, and within 30 days, ideally, we should respond. And if we believe that it's truly non-interventional, observational, based on your, observation plan, etc., then you can, of course, go ahead. Of course, this is now new drug, correct? So if it's a biologic on which you're doing this observational or non-interventional study, then that remains new throughout. It's not only for 4 years. So then you still need to go to the DCGI and then the subject expert committee. And once they approve it, then only you can do it. Data privacy clause is important in that informed consent, but it need not be as elaborate as in an RCT. Here, the independent non-institutional ethics committees can review and approve the documentation, because obviously you will have these private practitioners who want to do their study, but they're not affiliated to institutes that have their own EC. It's always a good practice to go on CTRI and put it there, because when you want to publish it, that will be asked. Compensation is still gray as far as if an SAE happens that is deemed to be related to that, even if it's an observational or non-interventional trial, then I know. What about the compensation? And so far, I'm not sure whether it has happened, but I'm sure in India, people will eventually need to compensate even for such studies. But actually, it's a little debatable, because in the real world, I mean, obviously, when you go to a doctor, you're going of your own free will. So that is taken care of, by tort law, and compensation per se should not really be given. But in India, things can get a little murky here. And generally, what happens is if you don't have sufficient phase 3 data for you to get the approval, you get what is called as a conditional approval, but then you need to do a phase 4 interventional study where the drug has to be given free of cost, and then the same rules apply, including compensation. But sometimes, depending on the indication, like a tumor agnostic rare cancer, do we still need to do a phase 4 interventional study, or can some real world evidence generation be enough for the regulator to then say that, yes, the company has met the requirements? You need large enough, why this real world needs to be, as I said, good enough. It's not just any real world data. You need to ideally have a control, comparator arm, preferably treatment naive. That means in both the arms, so you avoid what is called as channeling bias, because obviously the new drug, if the doctor is going to use it only in patients who have done very badly with the existing standard of care, then naturally it's not comparing apples to apples, and it's not a right comparison. And then, of course, propensity score matching may need to be done, because ultimately, in the real world, it's difficult. I mean, it's impossible to randomize per se, but if you do this propensity score matching, it's kind of like it's randomizable. You're making it comparable, the two cohorts, by adjusting for potential differences in patient baseline characteristics or numbers in each treatment group, and then, of course, an appropriate study period and follow-up. So this is just to tell you it's an animated slide. So gold standard is obviously RCT, but then RWE provides information on a broader range of patients, a broader range of clinical settings. You explore translation of that RCT data into day-to-day practice. Then, of course, long-term safety and effectiveness. And at least in most research-based ethical companies, this adverse event reporting, of course, continues for as long as the drug is on the market. And people are pretty stringent about the way they report safety. And finally, of course, RWE builds a complete picture to inform patient care. So that's the reason real world. And then there are different ways in which real world stuff can be done. I'm not going to go through all of this. We can discuss it later on in the question and answer session. Within medical information, one is to have this classified index of medical information so that your information is nicely kind of stored in a repository. And that helps in business continuity when people, because attrition can happen even within the medical department. But as long as all this is there, stored for posterity, it's easy for the next person to come and then take over. Standard response documents to frequently asked medical queries, and you can make that into a query book, give it to the field force so that they are equipped to answer queries that come from doctors. If it's off-label, then how exactly it needs to be, answered. We should ensure that these are not solicited, because sometimes what happens is you do a meeting and suddenly you get 20, 35 kind of queries from doctors all about off-label. So then that should ring your bell saying that there is something wrong here. A medical information query reply can be held in a court of law, especially if that doctor has done something and then the patient sues him. He will say, this is what the company has said. So be careful when you reply to a medical information query. Other things that you can do is actually have a medical information website and promote medical information as a product or service to only those doctors that your field goes to, so that they get an additional resource for them. You can conduct surveys. You can do all kinds of things like leave behind label, leave behind literature. Everyone knows LBL. Leave behind label is, when you launch a product, you need to have your field force not just leave the label of the product with the doctor, but even talk about it, and then maybe have some kind of an acknowledgement that yes, the person has done it. Because tomorrow the doctor may use your product in an off-label indication, and then in a court of law say that they never, told me what exactly is on label or off label. So this way, at least to some extent, it can protect the company that we've actually told you about the label and also left it with you. Between the lines is just a kind of thing that, nowadays there's a lot of health information coming in newspapers, because of which patients can sometimes just decide to do something on their own without even checking with the doctor, or the doctor who has no time to read the newspaper suddenly gets bombarded by even his peers or superiors or juniors. So between the lines is about whether medical advisors can, constantly, or maybe medical information, look for such kind of articles which come in newspapers, try and access the full text of that article, read it properly, maybe even read a Cochrane review on the same, and then in a very succinct manner, just a one-pager, give that doctor exactly what he needs to know about that article. Because in the newspaper, sometimes they publish it just to be sensational, and sometimes it's not balanced. So between the lines means that's the title of your newsletter, and you can always have the tagline that if you read between the lines, you don't need to read between the lines. Then, of course, anytime medical. So anytime the field force is with the doctor asks him a question that he can't answer, he should be able to connect to anyone in medical at that point who should be able to answer. And of course, it can be, what is it called? FaceTime or something, so that the doctor sees you, you see the doctor, the field force is also there listening to what exactly have you answered. Of course, if it's off label, then the field force has to leave the room. But otherwise, of course, that discussion. And then the doctor is really happy that when he wanted the answer, he got it from this company as compared to other companies who will give the information the next time that particular medical rep meets the doctor. But here the challenge is, in medical affairs, are you really fungible? Because nowadays, what I'm seeing is people are just getting specialized and specialized, so much so that who knows, one guy might tell me that, sir, I'm sorry, I'm only handling this product in non-small cell lung cancer. Another person may say only in right lung and not in left lung. So I'm trying to tell people you need to be fungible, V-shaped. That means you have to know a little bit about other products of the company as well, and then be absolutely in depth about the products that you manage, so that then anytime somebody calls you, you should be able to answer. But if you try to be too specialized, then it's difficult. And then eventually, India as an affiliate can be the regional medical information, like how you have global medical information. So for Asia region, you can be. And then, of course, publication is a strategy, as I told you. We can get into planning something, maybe a disease or a product registry. It could be validating a quality of life questionnaire. proceedings of international speaker programs can be then converted to documents and published. This is a particular, how do I put it? It is, like I mentioned to you about pharmacoeconomics or outcomes research, we can actually do workshops with institutes to make them understand. And I'm saying this because I've actually done it where a medical, the CMO of that, I think it was Southern Railways in Chennai, he called all his non-doctor kind of finance people because they're the ones who make that decision, L1, based on that. They just do a cost minimization analysis, but even in a cost minimization, you have to assume that the outcomes are the same. Here, we don't know whether the outcomes are the same or no, and yet they say the outcomes will be the same, and therefore this is cheaper, and they go for it. But that's not always the right way of doing it, and this is something which Shoibal only had shown us that on the one hand, you may have a very cheap kind of antifungal treatment A, on the other hand, a much more expensive antifungal. But eventually, if you look at the overall cost of managing that particular ailment, you'll realize that the much more expensive innovation may be much more effective, may be much safer, a very low failure rate. And in terms of you moving now to an alternative sector is much lower than if you take that very cheap, maybe generic or some other antifungal. And eventually, see the way he has estimated it also. He's not trying to say that the very expensive antifungal will eventually be very cheap. No, the grand total for treatment B was 17,085, and the grand total for treatment A was also 17,150, although it was much, much cheaper than treatment B. So all that this is trying to tell you is please understand that we need to have this kind of data in the real world to be able to justify the cost effectiveness, because you don't go only by price. Cost is also important because the overall cost of bringing that innovation to market, as Shoibal showed us, in fact, the 2014 Tufts Center for Drug Development in Boston pegged it at 2.87 billion US dollars. So that is the cost of bringing that drug to market. But here I'm talking of the overall cost of illness and how much this innovation will bring down the overall cost vis-a-vis the existing standard of care or some generic, which has never even done one study, because all that they require for approval is chemical equivalence, bioequivalence. That's it. Even clinical or therapeutic equivalence is not needed because obviously it's a small chemical. But even there could be differences. So that's why it's important for us to understand it's not just about this being cheaper and therefore I go for it. Obviously, medical affairs will have to understand clinical trial protocol development, stakeholder roles and all of that. And this is just to tell us that obviously this is the way clinical development proceeds. But now there are some hybrid designs. Research and practice is what actually Dr. Nani Wadekar was talking about. And then what we need to understand is what you do day to day in practice is good clinical practice. But what we do in clinical trials is good clinical research practice, and both actually help each other. So that's also important. And as I said, within a team, you have different functions. And if all of them work together as one, and that's also important, and that's especially for a medical director to ensure that this happens, then you have this growth, which is global, region, and the operating unit to the affiliate working together harmoniously. Clinical operations, these two symbols are Chinese hieroglyphic, which actually talk about a challenge and an opportunity. I mean, you can view that challenge even as an opportunity. And how I view it is, if you look at C, there is a gap. The moment you close the gap, it becomes an O. So it is that gap that you need to identify and close, and then it becomes an opportunity. Don't run away from the problem. Face it, find out, do a kappa, 5 whys sequentially, get to the root cause, come up with a solution, and that can become an opportunity for you. And if you're one with each other and one with the business, because that's important, you need to have the business of clinical acumen as well, and not just in medical affairs, in the medical department. This is something just to tell us that, sometimes we see doctors who are investigators in the trial, they present the data, and then they, if they have to answer some question, they say, no, we don't know the answer. This is, that company's study, and therefore let them answer. But let's understand something. Even if a company drafts the protocol, It is the clinician researchers who are at that protocol development meeting who then discuss it threadbare and make changes. So ultimately, it is their protocol as well. CRF, the data that is input is the patient's data of the investigators. Investigators are free to ask the statistician of that company regarding the SAP. And even at the end of study meeting, the report is discussed with all investigators. Only when everyone agrees it gets finalized. The same happens when the manuscript is also published. So why can't each investigator take that onus? This is my study. It's not just the company study. So this is just for you to understand that it's sometimes what you hear about the industry is not entirely correct. Then, of course, in GCTs, maybe obviously you won't have a role in study design, but in general, you need to align with stakeholders, then, of course, present to the SEC for approval of that protocol so that you get permission to do the study. Then, how exactly will you select? So, clinical operations will do that. But imagine if medical affairs is close to some medical society and they want to do a registry. That registry, if facilitated or sponsored by the company, will eventually help the company knowing exactly in terms of where exactly these patients are, so that ultimately you can decide where to select sites so that the entire process becomes a little more efficient. Then, of course, selection of the CRO, recruitment of patients, monitoring, where medical affairs is like the medical monitor locally, in addition to the monitor that Global has. Then again, report manuscript writing, and importantly, the information dissemination program that happens once the results get published. And that is again where medical affairs and everyone has to know it. So that's why I'm saying fungibility is extremely important. You can't really say that I only know this product or this therapeutic area. It's like when you gave your exam, when the examiner asked you a question, did you tell her that no, madam, I've only read this chapter on diabetes. Don't ask me any questions in the oncology chapter. Obviously, you had to know Goodman Gilman inside out. Make in India, again, see, besides the other Make in India, what about research in India? So now imagine if you can, help sites in India, whether government or other sites, in becoming really good at doing their own research as well as research for companies. So this way, what will happen is you'll generate good quality data in India for India, and then of course Asia and the world. So this way, this is another way of Make in India. So this is another area in which you can, help. These regulatory ethical frameworks, to some extent, Shoaib has taken it, but just to tell you that you have the New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules 2019, ICH GCP global standards. Informed consent needs to be administered as a process and not just get people to read that patient information leaflet and sign the document. Then, of course, ethics committee processes and management of SAE reporting. In terms of career roadmap, Shoaib has covered it, but these are just some thoughts I had in terms of what really the medical person who has done MD in pharmacology can opt for within the industry. Of course, you can continue in academia as well. You can decide to go abroad and get into research. And sometimes you can actually even branch out. I mean, I've seen people who have done MBBS and then they've done an MBA and they have started companies like Indigene, for example. So, I mean, there are lots of things that you can do and for which the skills that you need, and that is what I've mentioned here, because it's important to have the right mindset, the right behavior, attitude, because then you'll grow up. I mean, go up the ladder. The x-axis is the fundamentals, the core job, the results, and consistent performance. But the y-axis, which takes you above, like to the next level, that means you should have the potential to really go up, and then only you get promoted. Otherwise, you just get, obviously, based on performance, a performance hike, I mean, a pay hike. But promotion is based on whether you can do a role which is 1 or 2 grades above what you're currently doing. So for that, you need emotional intelligence. You need the right interpersonal skills. You should be a team player. And the right, when I say mindset and high performing, what it means is don't restrict yourself to just, I have done my bit, now marketing has to do his bit. No, ultimately that outcome is a common outcome. If that is not done, it's not done for the organization. So whatever it is, you have to work with your marketing and other colleagues and ensure the outcome is actually achieved. And obviously, you will need clinical and business acumen. Your communication skills are very important, and you should know how to manage both people, even if they don't report to you, and obviously project management. little bit on HR. So basically, development is a retention tool. So for me, it's like a dartboard where you know where the person has to eventually reach, and currently he may be somewhere in one of the outer circles, and how really do we take him there? When you move up the ladder, it's a ladder. You have to move up. It's not like an escalator. You just stand there and then it takes you up. And the onus is on you, not just your line manager. And then, of course, when I say two circles, see, typically the inner circle is the circle of strength, and the outer circle are the areas of improvement. People only focus on areas of improvement during performance appraisals, but actually, you should focus on the strength of that individual, because it is possible he's not even aware of his strength, or he's not utilizing that strength optimally. So that becomes his area of improvement. So if you focus on his strength and then that circle expands centrifugally, that area of improvement circle actually diminishes because the outer perimeter is not expandable. So focus on the strengths, the inner core, and then that person also feels good that you're helping that person maximize or optimize his strengths. And then what you see below is the 70-20-10 model. On the job training, cross functional, organization wide projects. You can even check about mentoring before giving the person management of people. And then, of course, specific courses. It could be HR or even based on your function, what exactly you need to know from an expertise perspective. And lastly, just some words of wisdom, which my parents actually have brought us up on. So the first is work is worship. So don't look at work as a four-letter word, because then you'll never enjoy it. Work only because you want to work. And if you look upon it as a higher calling, it's like saying God has outsourced his work to us. All of us are on contract, and when the contract expires, so do we. Similarly, the Bhagavad Gita, which says, one is the right to work, but not to the fruits thereof. So expect nothing from anyone except from yourself. Enjoy what you do for a living. This way, you won't have to work a single day in your life, because you won't consider it as well. Ask Sachin Tendulkar, did he work a single day in his life? He just enjoyed his cricket. Of course, he worked hard, he trained, practiced, etc. You don't just work for your company, but if you get into what is called as the ultimate merger, you are your company. So ask not what your company can do for you, ask what you can do for your company, because what can the company do for you? You are the company. And instead of always trying to win over competition, try also to win the competitor over. And you would have probably seen this movie, Sitare Zameen Par, and some other movies as well, where you understand that it's not only about the usual meaning of the word win. You can win in other ways as well. So that's all that I wanted to present. I'm really sorry if I've taken way beyond the time that was given to me, but thank you for listening patiently, and please feel free to ask questions.
Thank you, Dr. Viraj, for that very, very insightful talk. Time flew, and it's always a pleasure to hear you. And also, thank you so much for giving a very nuanced overview of the roles and responsibilities of medical affairs in the pharma industry to ultimately create value for patients, healthcare systems, and for the organization for which all of us work. So, really appreciate the talk. We have a bunch of questions in the chat, but before going to them, I would like to invite Dr. Gokte for her thoughts and remarks. Dr. Gokte, do we?
Ma'am may not
Again,
be there in the chat.
no, she is again unable to unmute herself.
Okay.
Never mind, Dr. Gokte, whenever you are able to kind of deal with the technology issue, please feel free to pitch in. There are a few interesting questions on the chat, and I'll probably start with them. With no particular sequence, I'll probably go to the last question. Interesting one. This was a question that was also posed to Dr. Mukherjee, Dr. Viraj. How is medical affairs preparing for artificial intelligence and digital transformation?
If you ask me directly, I may not know, because at least in Roche and even when I was in earlier companies, medical affairs was not really that much into AI as they should be. But where I think medical affairs should become really strong is in what I call data science, because we are the data custodians. And when I say data custodians, I mean we should know the data inside out. And especially if we work for a company that has generated the data. Now, ideally, our global clinical development colleagues should share with us that entire database so that we can also try and correlate, or they can do it for us, uh, between patient baseline characteristics and the outcome. Because, see, in any trial, now, you'll realize there are always four groups. One group where they do very well, both safety, efficacy. One where they do well, but maybe more on efficacy, less on safety. The third is just the opposite. And importantly, there is a fourth group, which Dr. C.S. Yajnik from Pune asked me. Tell me how many patients did not respond? And then do you know what were their characteristics? And did you then correlate and try and understand? Because, see, as medical, we have to be able to tell doctors which kind of patients are most likely going to respond in the best possible way. Then he knows how to select. And that's why I told you about visual aid and things like that. Now, this is something which I feel AI and ML and DL can help. And therefore, see, one thing, let us be very clear about, we have to know this, because if it is going to help us, then, because see, if you don't know it, who knows? You may, like as people say, na, you may not lose your job to AI, but you could lose your job to someone else in medical affairs, MD pharmacology, who's good at AI and who's able to really do a lot with data science. And imagine if you can actually analyze the data and come up with these characters. So typically, I'll tell you, people in marketing would just come up with some patient profile. That is not as accurate as if you can look at the data, the science, and then try and correlate. Because then the doctor knows exactly where to use the product. And this way, na, even competition will not mind, because you're not bad mouthing competition. You're not trying to say I'm better than someone else. The doctor doesn't want to know that. He wants to know, in my patient, will he or won't he respond? And nobody's going to do those N of one RCTs in the real world. It's very cumbersome. This is the best I can think of. So yeah, I mean, definitely medical affairs has to prepare, and there are many people in medical affairs I have come across who do these courses, on Coursera and others. So it's all online, but whatever it is, I think we just have to. I mean, AI and digital, we have to.
No, well said. I think the last 3 or 4 words, I think I fully agree with it. We just have to know this, gone are the days that where we say that, okay, scientific expertise will probably be the only component that will take you so far in medical affairs. A few examples that I'm aware of in the industry right now, I think medical affairs, and I need to be very candid here. We are lagging behind in terms of digital adoption and artificial intelligence adoption. Right now, medical affairs in pharma is looking at AI only as efficiency or productivity tool, right? It's about, content generation, data visualization. Oh, could I just develop an extract quickly? Or could I probably get a medical review of this promotional material done quickly? Could I use it as a personal productivity tool like a co-pilot, etc.? In fact, our R&D colleagues are doing far better in medical affairs, whether it's identification of novel targets or drug designing, etc. We probably have all heard about Exscientia having the first ever AI generated drug for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, etc. I also hear about Novartis having a pretty cool Data 42 project where they say that over the last 20 years, whatever clinical trials or studies they have done, probably 2,000 out of them, they're probably going to merge all of that and create a data lake and then run artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to identify answers to questions like sub responders or super responders, new prognostic markers, and things like that. So a lot that can be done, and sky is the limit. For probably we'll take that advice from you that you just cannot enter a medical affairs industry now not knowing anything about artificial intelligence. Moving on to the second question, what are the key skills an MD pharmacologist should possess before joining as a regional medical advisor? And probably the second part of the question you've already covered in the last bit of your presentation. After joining as an RMA, what factors will influence the career growth? Will it depend on sales performance of the product being discussed with the KOLs?
Okay, so this is from a person who wants to know more about field medical, or whether you want to call it regional medical advisor or medical science liaison. The key skills, whether you're an HO or in the field are those of a medical advisor. Now, agreed, based on being in HO, you're closer to marketing, so you'll have to do more of, brand strategy, review approval of promotional materials. You'll be more in touch with global colleagues. So those things I agree. In the field, you will not get those kind of opportunities, but the basic skills remain the same. So one is, as I said, the subject matter expertise. So you really, really have to get in depth. And when I say depth, so that is where I like deep learning all about. See, it's about learning not just about your product, obviously competition, but even beyond that, the therapeutic area, the disease area. You have to literally understand that area the way your clinician understands. So you are not an MD in medicine, you're not a DM in pulmonology or whatever. But what I try and do is, at least I mean, if I could show you my library at home, I have got textbooks of all these DM kind of people. Because see, if you have to understand these doctors, you have to read what they also have read and passed out. I'm not saying all of us have to do it, but the point I'm trying to make is you have to understand your customer, your doctor. And then if you're able to address, then it's much easier for him to relate to you, and then he will value you, because otherwise he'll wonder, you're not a clinician, you're a pharmacologist. Will you really be able to add value? So you have to show him. So one area which I clearly showed you is in terms of, when I say pharmacology, I mean statistics, clinical, the study design, protocol writing, and that kind of stuff. And EBM, where you read the data, try and understand, interpret, extrapolate, all that stuff. So this is where a clinician may not be that great. So he will value your. So that's what I meant, that initially you have to know your subject inside out. The second is obviously now a softer skill, which is in terms of the interpersonal relationships. One is with your customers as an internal, and two is with your external. Now, with internal, although they are not doctors, but still you need to respect them for being the professionals that they are and treat them the way you would treat professionals. That's why I keep saying that one may be professionally qualified, but that need not necessarily qualify you to be a professional. So try and be professional. And with doctors, obviously, you have to understand, based on either they are MDs or DMs or maybe even sometimes MBBS, and you have to know how to relate to their level of understanding and expectations. So that again is extremely important. And then obviously the communication. How well do you communicate? How well do you take decisions on what is compliant, what is not? And as I kept saying, that walking that thin line. So in that second question, there was something on sales performance. Please understand that a medical person will never be evaluated based on sales performance, because sales performance obviously is for a salesperson, marketing is for marketing, and medical is for the medical support that you've given for that product. And when I say support, I don't just mean reactive. Proactively also, have you strategized? Have you tried to understand the market, the customer, and the unmet needs, etc.? And then have you come up with some really good ways in which all that can be plugged or met? That is where your significant contribution will eventually be used by the sales colleagues, by the marketing colleagues. And yes, the product will become whatever it becomes, but you will never be evaluated based on, see, that way for everybody in the company, if you're an individual contributor, it is 70-30. So 30% is based on company performance. That is anyway a given, but that remaining 70% is based on what you add to your company from a medical perspective, and similarly for the others, sales, marketing, or whichever other function they are in. So don't worry too much about whether that will become an objective. That won't become, whether you're in field or HR. But you have to really, really know your medical stuff inside. Or that's what Shoaib was saying. No? For other people, they do say engineering and then they land up in the bank or wherever. In our case, you have to know your medical stuff inside out, and then you can build on it. You can even do an MBA, whatever you want. But the medical knowledge is something which you can't compromise on.
Thank you. Dr. Gupta, I see you probably you have resolved the technical issue. I would love to pull you in for your thoughts, remarks. It's still not
No,
going.
no,
Okay.
no. I have been listed as a participant and not a co-host, and that's, I think, my fault because I don't know how to use an iPad well. I need to change it to Gopte. So it is listed as iPad, and therefore I'm listed as a participant, but never mind. At least I figured it out. So no, I just wanted to thank you, Viraj, for a most wonderful lecture. What I really liked was your last slide, what your parents have inculcated in you. I think if they take back the philosophy from your last slide and, be a lifelong learner, I think that would be, a really very good thing. I really have nothing much to add. Pankaj, go ahead, please. Yeah. Wonderful lecture as always,
Thank
Viraj.
you. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm just cognizant that we are 42 minutes beyond the scheduled time. But there are just so many questions, probably the last two, and apologize to people who have posted the questions and will not be able to take them. But an interesting one that I saw. Uh,
So just one,
international.
just one point. Maybe the additional questions we will always we can pick it up and then put it over the
Yeah,
email and share it across. So then
sure,
you can
sure.
take one and then we can share the
Yeah,
rest over email.
that sounds like a good plan. Yeah. So I'll take this one. No order of
If
preference is just in front of me.
both speaker allow us, we can open the WhatsApp group if they are interested. We will be thankful to them if they can reply the query because the students are very much enthusiastic to meet both of the speakers, both all the moderators of today, all eminent peoples, and listening to them. And we will be able to open the WhatsApp group if they can find out some
Sure,
time.
Yeah, I can do it.
fine with me.
Thank you for
So
accepting our request.
probably the last question, Dr. Viraj. International pharma company, probably what people mean is India-based MNCs and non-India-based MNCs who are operating out of India. Difference in ways of working environment, myth, reality. Your thoughts on that?
This is a good question for me because I have experience of both. Although in my 27 years, it was more with three multinationals, as in Pfizer, Boehringer Ingelheim, and Roche. But I did spend time in Dr. Reddy's, Biocon, Lupin, Eris, and Pletico. So, which means I can give you a pretty accurate comparison. See, it's like this with companies which do their own research and come up with innovative molecules. Obviously, the entire perspective is different. They are very, very science kind of based. There's a lot of adherence from a compliance perspective. And I mean, you'll find it very structured, very systematic, very process driven. So you'll actually like working in such companies. So much so that I know some people would even say, should I do DM clinical pharmacology or should I actually join one of these companies and then learn clinical pharmacology even as I'm working? Because then I can enter the industry a bit earlier, whatever it is. But definitely in multinational companies, you do get that kind of exposure, and even globally you get to interact with the scientists, with global medical affairs and other colleagues. So I mean, it's definitely a different kind of world. And of course the product is priced at a point where it is not easy for many Indian patients to afford from an out of pocket perspective. So you also get into understanding pharmacoeconomics and outcomes research. You get into presenting to reimbursed agencies and try and convince them about the value. So it's not easy because many Indian doctors are very patriotic. So for them, it's like if you're an Indian company, no problem. But if you're from, I mean, you are an Indian, but if you're from that multinational company, they will not, I mean, they will like your product. But the moment it goes off patent and other companies can come in, they're very happy to prescribe those generics, biosimilars, because they feel there's no difference between the two, and the regulators approve, so there it should be prescribed. Regarding Indian companies, where one difference could be that, I mean, I'm talking of a benefit is decisions are made faster because you don't have to necessarily go to the global headquarters, whereas in global companies, it's not that quick. Uh, but with Indian companies, it's a different kind of model because obviously, if you're more into or maybe only into generics and biosimilars, then it's about differentiating your product from so many others who are like in the same boat. So that is a challenge, and one has to be innovative there. But if you ask me from a medical perspective, can you really do much? It depends. It depends on that company. Now, some Indian companies are multinationals also. So when they work in those, markets abroad, which are highly regulated, then they are very, very strict. But in India, somehow they feel like in Rome, do as the Romans do, in India, do as the Indians do. And even our regulator seems to be closer to, because see, obviously they look at it from the perspective that can Indian patients afford it? And if these Indian companies can quickly kind of do reverse engineering and, of course, now they can't violate patents, but whatever. So they're actually speaking, if you ask me from a medical perspective, while you can do, depends on the management in the company, but it's not as satisfying as if you work in a multinational. So that is one important, that's the main difference actually, from a medical perspective.
Wonderfully encapsulated. Just to add a very quick perspective, I think my view on the non-Indian MNCs, and I call both of them MNCs, right? Both are multinational companies, but non-Indian MNCs probably more focused and over-indexed on innovation, therapy area building, coming into more unmet medical needs and bringing in assets there, and have their muscles there. And the Indian MNCs have their muscles around access, taking that product to every nook and corner and to make sure that every eligible patients actually receives the product. So pros and cons on both the sides. There are opportunities of learning, of contribution, and creating value in both the organizations. I started out my career in Ranbaxy, and I'm extremely proud and grateful for the learnings that I got from Ranbaxy, a very reputed Indian MNC at that point of time, which was then acquired by Sun. And then I worked across Novartis and Pfizer. But I think all of these companies equally shaped my professional personality. So, start of the career, I would advise not to be too biased. Go in with the mindset to learn. Go in with the mindset to innovate, create, and solve problems. And wherever you kind of go with that mindset, and you'll hopefully probably be a better professional at the end of that experience. With that, probably.
Pankaj, I just wanted to respond to this question of Dr. Rakesh because it's important for all of us to know. See, just because Eli Lilly's Mounjaro did something, in terms of even CV protection, like, reducing the risk of heart attacks and stroke, which of course, semaglutide or Wegovy, etc. had. Now, obviously, tirzepatide is also managed. But please understand that it is not that just because that has happened, people in Novo Nordisk should now wonder, "Abhi kya karun? Should I move out?" It's not like that. Let's understand each study also properly. Read everything and in detail. Don't just go by some headline. That's why I told you about between the lines, that you need to understand that study in detail. And then, okay, we read the Wegovy studies also. I mean, the semaglutide, tirzepatide. And your job as a medical person is to be able to really understand the evidence on both sides. And just because this happens, it doesn't mean that semaglutide is not good and now everyone should go to tirzepatide. There could be certain nuances which you'll need to find out, but that only if you go into depths, you'll be able to pick it out. So that's why I'm saying it's not easy. See, in MD pharmacology also is not easy, but there you had to know the entire textbook. Here now it's a particular area, say obesity, diabetes, and GLP-1 receptor agonism. You have to really go deeper and deeper, and then maybe you'll be able to understand the differences. Thank you.
So thanks for picking that up, Dr. Viraj. There's quite a few questions that probably speaks about the interest that you've been able to generate in the audience, Dr. Viraj. An outstanding talk as always. I learn so much every time that I hear you speaking, and I'm sure that's the same case with the audience as well. However, we've run 50 minutes over time, which talks about the quality of our speakers, both the speakers. I'll probably close it now. We'll take up the organizer's suggestion of and continue to interact and respond to some of these questions on WhatsApp groups. Again, just want to thank you, Dr. Viraj, Dr. Gupte, and the organizers. I hand it back to you, Reshma, for the closing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, sir. So as we come to an end for today's session, it's an honor to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the entire organizing committee. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed speakers, Dr. Shwebal Mukherjee and Dr. Virat Suvarna, for their time, clarity, and candor. A sincere thank you to our moderators, Dr. Senthil, Dr. Bharti, Dr. Nitya, and Dr. Pankaj. Thank you for keeping the conversations focused, insightful, and continuously interactive and going. So we are deeply grateful to our mentors as well as the NPT leadership, that is Professor Dr. R.K. Dixit, Dr. Ganesh Dakle, Major Dr. Jitendra Singh, and our national coordinator, Professor Dr. C.M. Kamal. Thank you for your unwavering support. And last but not the least, thank you to all participants who are the heart of CPP, because without your questions, without your interaction, this program is the base of this program. So let's continue learning, collaborating, and we will see you all again in the next sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Viraj. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Hope to see you all again soon. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye.